The formation of the Indiana State Park System began over a century ago. Today, there are 25 state parks found in Indiana. One of the earliest to be formed was Turkey Run State Park, which contains over 2,000 acres in Park County. Turkey Run is divided by Sugar Creek. On the south side of the creek is the recreational area, including a swimming pool, horse stables, a nature center equipped with a planetarium, a peaceful campground, picnic areas for family gatherings, and a picturesque historic inn. On the north side of the creek is Rocky Hollow Falls Nature Preserve, containing spectacular canyons, interesting rock formations, and a virgin forest. The Cox Ford Covered Bridge borders the western side of the park, while the Narrows Bridge stands on the eastern boundary. The bridges represent 2 of the 31 covered structures found in Park County. As we journey through time and Turkey Run's unique landscape, we will discover how this area was formed, as well as who were the people instrumental in creating one of Indiana's gems.
After the Civil War, our nation was faced with many issues. Urban and rural areas had been destroyed during the war. Among these concerns was an effort to rethink, reconstruct, and reestablish the important elements of our country. While natural resources were harvested for the nation's economic growth, a growing concern about their continuance developed. A few people began to question how long these resources might last. An up-and-coming conservation movement had developed across our country during the late 1800s. People became worried about forests, fish and wildlife, water, and the wilderness. Our timber resources were being wastefully exploited, and industrial pollution was affecting the fish population. With this impending sense of loss, several conservationists advocated for change during the late 19th century. 2 different mindsets emerged: those who stressed wise use and resource management for good husbandry and future availability, and those who wanted to preserve areas of scenic nature for moral and spiritual values. Essayist Henry David Thoreau and Sierra Club founder John Muir believed that nature was important to the physical, mental, and spiritual well-being of Americans. Many Americans were living in urbanized areas, and these ideas became more and more popular. Eventually, groups looked for government-administered parks and forests. In 1864, the federal government granted Yosemite Valley to the state of California as a public park. 8 years later, Yellowstone was identified as our first national park to be preserved for its wonder and the enjoyment of future generations. With an act of Congress in 1890, Yosemite became a national park with a conscious mission to protect its wilderness. Support for state parks began with these early preservationist movements. During the late 1800s, new state parks were created, such as New York's Adirondacks, Michigan's Mackinac Island, and Minnesota's Itasca State Park. Advocates of conservation looked for places untouched by man, or a chance to reserve undeveloped areas. One such place in Indiana was Bloomingdale Glens, or what locals called Turkey Run. This name was given to the area due to the large number of wild turkeys being protected under the sandstone overhangs. From the 1880s until 1915, Hoosier nature enthusiasts walked through country fields, rode bicycles, and visited the Lusk Woods seeking the tranquility of nature. The old Indianapolis, Decatur, and Springfield Railroad thought to convert the Glens into a summer resort. Advertisements were posted, outings were arranged, eateries were established, and tents could be available for lengthier stays. People came from great distances to experience this enchanting land. Despite the changes of management of the Glens, Lusk's Woods continued to grow in popularity. In 1910, Turkey Run's lease was granted to R.P. Luke through 1917. This action later proved to have a profound effect. After the formation of the park, Governor Goodrich appointed him superintendent of Turkey Run. Many people throughout our nation were influential in the development of our park system. One such individual was Stephen Mather. Mather was a wealthy businessman who made his fortune with the Borax Company, made famous by the label 20 Mule Team Borax. After retiring in his 40s, Mather pursued his personal interests. While traveling with his wife to Europe in 1904, Mather's longtime interest in nature was renewed. After visiting many parks throughout Europe, Mather became inspired to help create accessible public lands in America. He became a dedicated conservationist and a friend and admirer of the influential John Muir. Stephen Mather came to Washington from Chicago in January 1915 as Special Assistant to the Secretary of the Interior for National Parks Concerns. He worked tirelessly to promote park access. Through these efforts, Mather helped persuade Congress to create the National Park Service in 1916. The following year, he was appointed the first National Park Service's director. During his tenure, the Park Service expanded with the addition of Shenandoah, Great Smoky Mountains, and Mammoth Cave National Parks. Mather left office in January 1929 after suffering a stroke and died a year later. Meanwhile, in the early 1900s, Richard Lieber, a German immigrant, began promoting conservation of native lands and structures in Indiana. His first job was working as a reporter for the Indiana Journal. After visiting Yosemite and the Rocky Mountains in 1900, Lieber attended a White House conference by Theodore Roosevelt. Lieber wrote a series of articles promoting conservation after meeting Roosevelt. Indianapolis was chosen to be the site of the 4th National Conservation Congress with Lieber as chairman. It was here that Lieber met Woodrow Wilson, and a partnership for conservation was formed. During the first 2 decades of the 1900s, Indiana began to purchase lands designated for state parks. Richard Lieber is known as the father of Indiana state parks. Due to Lieber's leadership, Turkey Run became nationally known and a model for state parks. On May 7, 1923, Turkey Run hosted the 3rd National Conference on State Parks. Joining Lieber at the conference were many well-known dignitaries, including Stephen Mather. Juliet Strauss was another prominent figure from Indiana who contributed to the conservation efforts. Juliet was born in Rockville, Indiana in 1896. As a youngster, Juliet would constantly wander through Park County's abundantly lush forests. Juliet was influenced by her strong-willed mother and her public school education, and was soon noticed by John Beadle, the editor of the Rockville Tribune. After her marriage to Isaac Strauss, she began writing squibs and sayings for the Rockville Tribune, and her other literary works later appeared in the Indianapolis News and the Ladies' Home Journal. Through her writings, Juliet became influential in preserving Turkey Run.
We begin our geologic journey of the park at the Nature Center and descend the steps to Sugar Creek and head up Trail 2, roughly paralleling the creek. We pass by Newby Gulch and will soon encounter Box Canyon and Gypsy Gulch. This is our first glimpse of the fascinating rock formations that have attracted people for many years. The geology of Turkey Run State Park is a trip through time. The ravines and hollows exhibit 600 to 300 million years of a unique past. The Mansfield Sandstone deposit was formed when the sand built up at the mouth of the ancient Michigan River. During the Carboniferous period, this deposit was slowly compressed into solid bedrock. Glacial meltwaters contributed to the formation of today's canyons. Small streams continue the erosionary process of the sandstone as we pass through Gypsy Gulch. The name Gypsy came from a mule that fell off the cliff many years ago. Soon after leaving the gulch, we find a side trail that leads us down to Goose Rock along Trail 1. Here, walking along Sugar Creek, we get our first glimpse of the Narrows covered bridge.
Upon first sight of the Narrows of Sugar Creek and the historic covered bridge, you might want to imagine the thoughts that ran through Solomon Lusk's mind when he first scouted out this area. Captain Lusk served under General Harrison during the Battle of Tippecanoe at Prophetstown in 1811. For military services rendered, he was granted a parcel of land near Sugar Creek. In 1819, 31-year-old Solomon and 21-year-old Polly Beard were married. 2 years later, they traveled from Fort Harrison to the Narrows and their new property. The self-sufficient family built a log cabin along the creek and raised 8 children. The Narrows was an ideal site for water power, so by 1826, Lusk had built a grist mill. Mr. Lusk was a visionary. He knew that New Orleans was the main market for foodstuffs. The annual spring rains allowed him to trade along the waterways of Sugar Creek, Wabash River, and finally the Mississippi. In addition, a general store and tavern soon became necessary buildings for the pioneer tradesmen. By 1841, Solomon had established a profitable business. Having outgrown their cabin, Lusk and his sons began building a brick home. The Lusk men made their own bricks and constructed a new house with walnut woodwork and floors of yellow poplar. Because Solomon needed a source to heat his home, he proceeded to dig a coal mine, which can still be found today on Trail 4 near the creek. The Lusks' business endeavors continued to thrive until 1847, when a major flood destroyed the mill and nearby buildings. Traces of the former tavern may be found across from the lost mill site. The massive deposit of sandstone used as a foundation is all that remains of the mill. Upon closer examination, one can see the mill race, the timber supports, the location of the sluice gate, and the turbine drive shaft, all of which were carved from solid rock. Present-day canoeists are able to maneuver their crafts into the outlet of the mill race. 1861 saw the beginning of the Civil War. Being loyal to the Union, the youngest child, Salmon Jr., went off to war and was killed in 1863 at the age of 20. Salmon Sr. died 6 years later at the age of 81. His son John, age 32, inherited the residence and 1,000 acres of land. John Lusk continued to reside with his mother until her death in 1880. John never married and became a recluse, with an obsession to protect the land and the forests that were his heritage. Living alone in the brick house, he stubbornly resisted every effort by the lumber industry to harvest the virgin forest. John died in 1915 at the age of 78. Today, the Narrows-covered bridge at the eastern end of the park acts as a gateway to visit the Lusk home and mill site.
Leaving from the Lusk home, the journey of discovery continues in hopes to gain an understanding of the creation of the most well-known segment of Turkey Run, Rocky Hollow. We begin by hiking along the upper virgin forest of Trail 4, once protected by John Lusk. The forest contains many biological curiosities, including small creatures, interesting fungi, including Indiana's favorite morel, a large variety of seasonal wildflowers, and huge hardwood trees. Maples, beech, oak, hickory, and enormous walnuts, such as this one, are abundant. You might wonder how this forest survived the lumber companies of the past. Soon we descend into a depression that contains a small unnamed stream that is usually a dry creek bed during the summer months. Here we get our first glimpse of what the canyon must have looked like in its beginnings. This stream bed meanders through the forest, relentlessly cutting slowly into the soil. And then we begin to see the exposure of small mounts of Mansfield sandstone. The erosion of the soil continues, persistently cutting deeper into the soft stone. We finally come to a place of amazement. The top of the Devil's Bathtub, known today as the Punch Bowl. Just try to imagine the excitement of a kid seeing this for the first time, and possibly enjoying the coolness of its waters. A sharp, narrow slice in the sandstone creates a somewhat older segment of Rocky Hollow. Steps and handholds cut long ago help us traverse this tranquil setting. The closeness of the walls accentuates the interesting and sometimes strange sounds of nature. Suddenly, the oldest portion of the canyon appears. At this point, the canyon is much wider and has a flattened base. The moist walls are covered with moss, lichens, ferns, and the flat, leathery liverworts. Due to the cool canyons, hemlock trees and Canadian yews flourish exclusively in this portion of the state. Before draining into Sugar Creek, we come to Wedge Rock. It's a huge prism-shaped rock that fell from the top of the cliff and remained upright. A tiny bit of fear and wonderment comes to mind that something that occurred long ago could happen again while you walk around or climb on top of the rock. Evidence that the plummeting took place long ago is shown by the tree, which has taken root in the crevice and somehow finds nourishment with its roots. I always try to imagine what it sounded like when this mass broke and fell long ago. Many generations of people have wandered through this majestic place that we call Rocky Hollow, and in doing so have contributed their footprints onto the worn path. We must ensure that future generations will also experience this joy. However, at one time, the protection of this magnificent place was in question.
After John Lust died in 1915, the land known as Bloomingdale Glens was in danger of being purchased for its timber. Governor Ralston appointed a commission to acquire the land for a state park. The 5-person group included Juliet Strauss and Richard Lieber as chairman. They had learned that the park had been appraised at $18,000. However, there wasn't a fund by which Indiana could purchase the land. But within a short time, the commission raised $20,000 by popular subscription. Indiana was nearing its 100th anniversary, and the Centennial Memorial Commission was seeking a suitable memorial. A system of state parks was deemed appropriate, with Turkey Run as the first established state park. It was advantageous that Mr. Lieber was a member of both committees. The date of the estate sale was set for May 18, 1916. The commission anticipated little competition. The commission had a gentleman's agreement with many lumber companies to allow the state to purchase the land for the park. However, several of the Lusk heirs were determined to keep the property and bid high enough to do so. They intended to continue to operate the private resort as a profitable investment. The Hoosier Veneer Company also joined in the bidding. With over 2,000 people gathered at the steps of the Lusk home, the bidding commenced. The bid continued to increase. The state's final offer was $30,100. The Hoosier Veneer Company bid $100 more and was declared the winner. The saddened crowd filed away, thinking there would be little chance of acquiring the land for a state park. The newspapers gave the matter a great deal of publicity. Juliet Strauss had not only written a letter to the governor, but her columns and editorials also appeared in local newspapers stating her position.
The state of Indiana, meaning the governor and the officers, are at present absolutely helpless to do a thing about Turkey Run. There is no legal means by which Governor Ralston could purchase Turkey Run. The legislature is not in session, nor will it be until many months after the date of the sale of Turkey Run. But the citizens of Indiana are not helpless, and they are not going to be so stupid as to allow the legal technicalities which held the governor in and prevent him from action at this time to be the means of letting Turkey Run go. so we are going to purchase Turkey Run. When I say we, I mean you and me. We, us, and company. I mean the people who love the rocks and rills, the woods and templed hills of their native land. This is a call to patriotism.
People grew excited, and Richard Lieber continued to raise money. Lieber hoped to buy the park from the Hoosier Veneer Company. Due to the fact that R.P. Luke's lease didn't expire until 1917, the lumber company was prevented from immediately harvesting the lumber. In November 1916, after intense public outcry and further negotiations, the land was purchased from the lumber company for $40,000, with the extra funds coming from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. In the meantime, McCormick's Creek Canyon became the first state park of Indiana.
From the beginning of Rocky Hollow till its end, we dropped 140 feet and have once again come to Sugar Creek. Now it's time to go back up. We continue our journey west up through Crevice Rock and some steep steps. Eventually, we reach high ground and have a great view of the creek and the suspension bridge. After traveling about a quarter of a mile, we arrive at the top of the Icebox. Before the development of the trails, this was once one of the most difficult places in Turkey Run to reach. This large hole had been named the Devil's Icebox for a gang of hog thieves that worked along the banks of the creek. They had butchered and stored their cash until a sufficient number was collected. The thieves proceeded to load the meat onto flatboats, where it traveled downstream to New Orleans. Today, it's much easier to reach the bottom of the hole and explore crevices beneath the enormous rock.
You make it through there? Squeeze through. Don't get muddy though. Watch your head. I know. Very good.
That was awesome. Ouch.
Ouch.
Oh.
Okay.
Once leaving the Icebox, we continue our journey westward to the mouth of a beautiful slot canyon. Many years ago, Mr. Patol was hunting the area and was confronted with a large bear. A battle was waged that left the old man with many bruises, but victorious as he bagged his game, hence the name Bear Hollow. The steep walls are covered with ferns and other shade-tolerant plants. This canyon ends with an impassable wall, or at least until the ladders were built. After carefully placing our feet on each rung, we get a great view back down the ravine. Meanwhile, our journey continues.
As we leave Bear Hollow, we ascend the 140 steps with a bench conveniently placed 3/4 of the way up in order to catch your breath. On your way up, you may notice that some of the steps seem to be very old. We have noticed several other stone steps throughout the park and wonder when and who made them. When the stock market crashed in October of 1929, the world began one of the worst economic downturns of the industrial age. Thus started the Great Depression. Millions of people lost their jobs as the unemployment rate in the U.S. rose to over 25%. Franklin Roosevelt, newly elected in 1932, immediately took action and created the New Deal. To reduce red tape, the Civilian Conservation Corps was formed and was directed by the Departments of War, Labor, Agriculture, and Interior. This organization put millions of young men, ages 18 to 25, to work all over the country. Over 63,000 men from Indiana were sent to work on America's much-needed infrastructure. Many of our state and national parks benefited from the labor of these men. Between 1933 and 1942, Company 2580 built many trails throughout the park. 1935 saw the construction of numerous structures at Turkey Run, including 6 shelter houses, a service building, Sunset Point, and a new gatehouse, all of which are still used today. In 1940, the Saddle Barn was built, where tourists can enjoy horseback riding. Construction of the cabins began in 1941. These offered additional rooms near Turkey Run Inn. With the onset of World War II, the CCC program ended in 1942. The commissary was initially constructed by these men, but was finished later by park employees and open to the public. In 1968, the commissary was converted into a nature center. It serves as the office for the park's naturalist to develop interpretive programs all year long. This fine educational facility contains a planetarium, a wildlife viewing room, and an exhibition room containing a wide variety of nature displays that kids of all ages may enjoy. So the next time you walk up these well-placed steps throughout the park, be sure to give a mental thanks to all those who worked so hard during America's difficult years.
Once again, we have entered the high country of virgin forest with relatively easy hiking. When the spring waters are flowing above Boulder Canyon, the study of geology becomes fun.
That was a good scream, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was good.
That,
Oh my God! Are you lucky your face?
After a bit of a climb, we find ourselves at the top of another canyon. We descend carefully on the precarious trail over several large granite boulders. They seem out of place among the vast sandstone formations of the park. These Canadian boulders are glacial erratics, deposited by the last ice age. Welcome to Boulder Canyon. Long ago, larger erratics caught in the swirling eddies would create potholes, like the well-known Punch Bowl. Smaller erratics or pebbles can be discovered in Sugar Creek, located at the end of the canyon. Even though we're going down canyon, we find that the trail ascends once again into higher forest and a chance for more discoveries.
You can join up with our group. He said he wanted to be McConnell's.
Yeah, I did.
Hey,
Just
what's
I
on
think
this
you're
tail? That's probably.
I've been begging for a pet stand.
got
And I was like,
caught.
no, it'll get out. Your cattle.
no way.
Your cattle
There's no way. You're gonna chicken out.
It hurt.
Is he?
Yeah, he's got like a cut here.
Spot.
No, that's where he poops.
That's what I that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, got it all over Connor's hand.
Another set of conveniently placed steps lead us down into Falls Canyon. Here we find another lush green ravine covered with moss and ferns. In the spring, when the water is flowing over the sandstone trail, care must be taken because the name, Falls Canyon, may change from a noun to a verb. When exiting Falls Canyon, we come to Sugar Creek's rocky beach. After a long day of hiking, campers from long ago were refreshed in the old swimming hole. Thankfully, some things never change. Once refreshed, we make the long hike back along the creek. Finally, the sight of the suspension bridge gives us a sense of relief for our weary legs and feet. In 1918, 2 years after Turkey Run State Park was established, Lafayette Engineering and Wallace Marshall built the stunning suspension bridge. 2 cables, each one designed to carry a load of 275 pounds per foot, support the 4-foot wide, 202-foot long pedestrian bridge. The sandstone cliff on the north side of the creek provides cable anchorage, while a 50-ton block of concrete was used on the south side. Prior to this, back in 1884, an old flatboat was used to ferry people over to Rocky Hollow until the old swinging bridge was built. Probably, to no one's surprise, this feeble span collapsed in 1917. The spring floods of 2013 nearly destroyed the strong suspension bridge. A tree washed downstream in the torrents caused significant structural damage, causing the DNR to close the walkway. After the State Budget Committee approved a little over $200,000, the entire wood deck was repaired, and in October of that same year, the bridge was once again open to the delight of many. A final climb up the old steps from the suspension bridge brings us to the Nature Center for a well-deserved rest.
The Nature Center indicates that our journey is almost over. A short walk brings us to a stately red brick building amongst towering trees. The inn, which offers us a place to relax and nourish our bodies, was built in 1919. It was Indiana's first state park hotel. An expansion was added in 1922 that provided ample lodging to the thousands of guests that visited the park each year. Today, the inn offers 79 fully furnished rooms and cabins, as well as an indoor heated pool and dining facilities at the Narrows restaurant. A lounge with a fireplace is a perfect place to relax after a hike. The inn provides space for parties, conventions, and other group events. A moderate hike behind the inn leads to the Lieber cabin. In 1918, Lieber discovered a pioneer's log cabin built in 1848. He liked it immediately and convinced the owner to have it moved 3 miles so it could serve as the administration building for the state park. All but the chimney was salvageable. The restored cat and clay chimney used sticks of white walnut and a Mansfield sandstone base. The cabin, believed to be the oldest in the state, is listed in the National Historic Register and is now used as a museum honoring Lieber and the entire Indiana State Park system. Continuing westward, we come to Sunset Point. Completed by the CCC, a rustic stone wall overlooks Sugar Creek. Sunset Point is a good example of stonework consisting primarily of walls, steps, and bridges completed throughout the park many years ago. Sunsets can be appreciated from this excellent vantage point. Directly below the point, we can continue our early evening stroll up through the ravine that gave the park its name, Turkey Run. Before we ascend Trail 6 out of the canyon, we pass under the concrete arch of an old bridge that was built in 1914. Designed by H.L. Davies and built by W.E. Ireland, the bridge soars 100 feet above Turkey Creek. Until 1933, Old State Road 47 passed over this strong structure, directing tourists through the original park gate on to the inn. Once atop the bridge, a short hike over Turkey Run Hollow leads to an old log church. It was originally built in 1871 on a ridge in Sugar Creek Township. The church was later abandoned, but Colonel Lieber reconstructed the building in Turkey Run in 1923. The church is still used today as a house of worship. At the conclusion of the trail is a memorial to Lieber. A bronze bust is nestled in a curved stone wall on a quiet hillside in the park. The memorial was dedicated in 1932. As evening approaches, we walk toward the end and find the memorial to Juliet Strauss. Erected by the Women's Press Club of Indiana, the sculpture is called Subjugation, for they believe it captured the spirit of Strauss's writing, the subjugation of the material to the spiritual. Our journey through this unique environment has come to its conclusion. Let us remember that over 100 years ago, several people with a vision helped create Turkey Run State Park. Their efforts continue to be appreciated today as thousands of visitors experience the beauty and ruggedness of this park.
Keep close to nature's heart and break clear away once in a while and climb a mountain or spend a week in the woods. Wash your spirit clean. John Muir.